This is a hunt for Bottom Bill, and Bottom Bill is a 5.5-year-old deer that knows what he's doing on his own farm. And he loves the bottoms and tries to keep the wind in his favor all the time. The reason I call this deer Bottom Bill is because clear back in 2019, the fall of 19, we ended up getting this farm. It was one of mine and my buddy Mark, the owner of Novix Tree Stands. It was our first real purchase of an actual bigger size hunting farm. We had sold a 70-acre piece in Ohio, and we actually had kind of turned that, put it as a down payment to get a bigger farm in Illinois. I kept getting pictures of this really pretty 10-pointer, and I could tell he was a 3.5-year-old deer. And I'm like, man, if this deer can make it, he's really gonna be special. In Illinois, most of the terrain, at least in the area that I hunt, the flats are up high, and then the drainages all turn into timber. But I would always get Bill's picture, like during daylight and stuff, in the bottoms. There was a creek system, and they're not real wide bottoms. I'm talking 150 yards, 100 yards, you know, some only 50 yards wide. But he would always run these bottoms. That's just kind of how he worked around. And so, therefore, I gave him the name Bottom Bill. I thought it was just going to be interesting to see this deer progress and what he would turn into over the years. Hunting bottoms is a real tricky situation. Your thermals, your wind, everything reacts differently when you're in terrain like that. A lot of times what people don't realize is even in flat ground, that wind hits those trees, hits that foliage, and it'll start circling around. And a lot of times people wonder, well, the wind was perfect, but those deer would get me, especially in the evenings. That happens. The thermals will fall and they'll just circle back, and then they'll eventually go on. So you kind of have to always keep that in your mind. But same with the bottoms, and that's why a lot of times mature bucks really like using the bottoms or the side hills, because they can catch those thermals, keep that wind a little better in their face, I feel. I notice I get a lot more mature daylight buck pictures, like through midday during the rut, and you know, just in general in those kinds of areas. And then they go up high and they'll bed. I feel like they can use their senses to the advantage of having wind hitting them in the back, looking down low. But when they go to travel, a lot of times they'll go down low, get a drink, and they'll just kind of navigate those areas headed to the doe bedrooms or wherever they want to go, whatever food source. It's kind of like a freeway. They get in those bottoms, and then they decide, okay, I'm going to go to food plot number 1, or I'm going to go to cornfield number 2, and they can just take these routes. If you situate your cameras in certain areas in those spots where there's hub travel or creek crossings, you're going to learn a lot about your mature deer on your farm or the place you can hunt. We're fast forwarding now to like 2022. So Bill is now 5.5 years old, fully mature deer. He's ready to go. I'm like, this is the year we're going to take him out. He didn't grow a ton from the year before to this year. You know, from 21 to 22, he made a jump, but it wasn't like the jump we expected. And his body is just enormous, and he is a rough deer. I mean, like, this deer literally beats the snot out of everybody around. Like, once he comes into the farm, he cleans house. On this farm, we kind of call it the south end, the north end, and he likes to be on that south end a lot. We've got a spot that we call the water hole, and I had been trying to kill Bill there a little bit because it was really easy access. I could get out of there quick, and I had plenty of pictures of him at this water hole. But the water hole was like in that dividing point of north and south of the farm, and it just seemed like for some reason whenever I would decide to hunt him there, he just never showed up there. He'd be somewhere else on another camera or whatever. But we had a warm evening, a lot of wind was getting ready to come in, and I thought, you know, I might catch him on this spot. But he also could show up in a bean plot where there was a few other mature deer and a couple call bucks. And I decided to put Dylan up in this standing bean plot to try to kill a certain buck. And lo and behold, as Dylan's sitting there, Bill's in the field. Dylan gets great footage of Bill. So that kind of started really solidifying what Bill was doing, you know, and where he was staying now. He had moved his range because he's looking for new deer. He's looking for new does to breed. Where he liked to live, or at least where I felt he liked to live, was, you know, partly in the bottoms, but partly on these side hills in an area that me or my neighbor don't really hunt much. We kind of leave it as a sanctuary, but there was an area that I felt like I could get to where I wasn't intruding into that sanctuary, and we call it the ditch stand. And it's a little creek ditch where a big drainage comes down, the creek runs through, you've got a couple other ones, and it just kind of makes a great hub. The tough part with this ditch stand, or what I call the ditch stand, is there is no good wind to hunt it, because just how the structure of the land is, your wind will just constantly swirl. You're never gonna get a consistent wind, hardly ever, in a spot like this. So a lot of times when you have these bottoms like this, you know, I look for morning hunts. I try to hunt mornings that are super still and really cold. But also on super, super windy days, you can get lucky. And the wind can be so strong that you might get lucky enough that the wind hits the structure enough that it just blows up that structure and over, and it doesn't do a lot of that swirling. And that is the exact case on the morning that I actually hunted Bill.
Well, good morning. Here it is, November 11th. I'm in Illinois. I'm in a spot that I never go in, hardly ever. I've never hunted it before. We've had this farm 2.5 years, and I've never hunted in this spot. We kind of keep it as a sanctuary, and it's where a bunch of ridges connect down here and a bottom going into some CRP grass and a creek down here. And it was real windy last night. It's supposed to be windy today. And down in here, it's not as bad. And I think these bucks will be down in here cruising through this bottom, searching through this grass and off these points looking for does. I'm just set up here in basically a classic type rut situation. But this time of year and in this kind of a situation, anything could walk by.
Now, I don't like to do just a ton of blind calling if I can help it. There's times I do because I need to make something happen, and it's kind of like a predator calling situation. Let's just see what we can get going. But most of the time I like to have eyeballs on a deer or know that there's a deer close by to make that scenario happen first. With seeing that deer up on the ridge, I'll grunt first with the extinguisher a few times, see if I can see him, and if that doesn't work, then I'm gonna rattle. Eventually I could tell that the first buck I saw was not a very big deer. He came down the hill, crossed the ditch, went up right to where I came in. But I could still tell there was a bigger deer up there. So I grabbed the black rack and I'm like, I'm gonna make this happen. See if I can get eyeballs on this deer. I no sooner than set the black rack up, look to my left, and I see this little buck bust me. I mean, he had come running right in so fast. The leaves were quiet. It had rained the night before. And he actually caught me moving. Just out of reaction, knowing, I was like, well, he doesn't know exactly what I am. And so I just started grunting at that deer with the extinguisher.
That's all I'm gonna do.
That deer stopped, and he stopped right beside another deer, and I saw a deer move his head, and here it was actually Bill. It worked out perfect because now Bill's thinking in his mind that most likely scared this deer was just this other buck. And I'm like, all right, I got to get into Bill's head here, and I've got to make that deer want to keep coming down this trail and come to me. So now I'm taking the extinguisher, I'm switching it to the doe side, I'm trying to make some doe bleats a little bit to act like a hot doe over here. Finally, the extinguisher made him just decide, you know what, I've got to go check it out. got Bill. I got Bill. He's dead right there. Oh, I didn't think that was gonna happen. Thank you, Lord. I hope I got that on film. He came right underneath my stand. Oh, thank you for the extinguisher. Oh, yes. Thank you, Lord. He's dead right there. Those mega meats just destroy him. I'll tell you, look at the body on that dude. Holy moly, Bill. Dude, he's bigger than I thought. He's quite the deer. Wow. Oh, Bill. He definitely was a dominant buck. And I actually kind of wondered, truthfully, if his rack wasn't bigger than I thought because his body's so big. But he is a giant deer. So, like, looking back, you know, to give you some key points on why this hunt was successful. One, using my scent control, using that ditch access to where I was not walking in front of those deer. Cameras definitely can be an advantage. I don't want people thinking that, like, because we get a picture of a deer, we go instantly within 10 minutes to that spot. I don't hunt like that. But these cameras just give me intel, and it tells the story of how a deer uses a farm. And you learn how they do things, but it helps me just kind of learn my farm, and I don't have to be in there all the time intruding. Using my knowledge of, like, deer body movements and, like, reactions and knowing what deer are thinking, in a sense, I feel like is a huge part of me being successful here too. Being able to know that I can call to this deer. He was in a mood that he was gonna react. Now, if he'd have been standing there with his tail up all the time and really freaked out, I probably would not even have messed with him. I would have just let him be, let him go off, and I'd have tried to reposition maybe later that evening because I didn't want to make him call shy. I didn't definitely want to give up my position to make him think, oh my gosh, I am 100% being hunted. I got Bill. I think one of the real keys too is knowing when to dive into a spot. Like, this ditch stand was such a sacred spot, but knowing when to hit that spot, when to dive into it, definitely are some of the most important things to making this hunt successful.